Would it be better to just leave the public schools shut down permanently? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principal case for libertarianism in the context of the burning issues of the day. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another round of Libertarian Angle.
It's good to be with you, of course, and with our viewers and listeners who kindly share a little bit of their time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Let me preface this by saying that we've got a big conference coming up, online conference. It's on the national security state and the Kennedy assassination. Registration is free. We've got space for 500 people. We've got 352 registrations. So if you want to attend this, be sure you sign up. It starts on Wednesday night, March 3rd, about 7 p.m. And then it continues on a weekly basis all the way through April 21st. And you can see the entire schedule and the speakers there at our website at fff.org. So we hope you join us. If you're new to FFF, sign up for our FFF Daily, subscribe to our daily journal, FFF Daily, and then also consider supporting our work with a donation. Okay, Richard, it's been a while since we discussed education. And from what I understand, because of COVID, a lot of these public schools have been shut down. Shut down after COVID in March, and a lot of them have remained shut down in the fall semester. And so this, of course, means that all these kids are going uneducated, right? I mean, isn't that what we're always told, that if there's no public schooling, kids are going to go uneducated? And yet it seems that a lot of parents are reconsidering and maybe trying to decide whether to really send their kids back to public schools if they are ever opened up again. And it's what you and I have been arguing for 30 years here at FFF, that education and public schooling are opposites. I mean, you go to public school to get indoctrinated. This is where you learn obedience to orders and regimentation. I mean, it's really, I consider the military light public schooling. The bell rings and you have to go to your next class, no matter how enthralled you are with the subject that you're studying. They teach you deference to authority. I mean, this is where the mindset comes in of placing your trust in whatever public officials say, supporting whatever they do. If they say that they've got to invade Iraq, oh yes, we've got to believe our public officials. This mindset of deference to authority is what public schooling is all about. It has absolutely nothing to do with education. In fact, I think public schooling is really more like memorization and regurgitation. Education is a seeking process. It's where you're really loving something and you want to go study it, and you buy books on it, and you look at the internet for it, and you Google it, and because you're hungry for it. I mean, that's what education is. In fact, I think the original derivation of the word educate is educare, which is to seek. It's to seek understanding, to seek knowledge. If you look at the libertarian movement, I would say 98% of libertarians have learned libertarianism on their own. They're certainly not going to teach it in public schools because we stand against public schools. We're an anathema to public school people. So where do you learn about libertarianism? Well, you learn it by seeking it out. You go to websites, libertarian websites, you buy libertarian books. And that's the true knowledge. I mean, that's where you're seeking information. And every kid is imbued with this. I mean, you can see this from 0 to 6 years old. Every kid's eyes are like this wide, and he's looking around, and he's in awe of the universe, and he's absorbing everything he can. And he learns English, which is a very complex language. At least here in the United States, he learns English before he's 6 years of age. And then that natural process would ordinarily continue. And I think that's what parents are discovering, is that children love to learn. It's their natural aptitude. public schooling destroys that love of learning. If you look at the number of graduates of public schools, I'd say the great majority of them hate school by the time they graduate. They hate reading. They just want to get out of school. It's boring to them. And it is boring. I mean, my public school experience was boring. And so it destroys this love of learning. It destroys education. I think the best thing we could ever do, and what the American people could do, is to use this as an opportunity to question the whole role of government in education, just like our ancestors questioned the role of government and religion, and then ultimately just separate education in the state the way our ancestors separated church and state, and get the government at all levels, local, public schools, state level, national level, at all levels, get government out of education. What do you think, Richard?
Well, I agree. I mean, there's a world of difference between private schooling and government or public schooling. For example, I had been going to public school, and then when I was about 13, I was sent to a Catholic school for 1 year. And I loved it because I thought that Sister Mary in the catechism class was just a knockout. Oh, am I allowed to say that to the Catholic viewers and listeners? But I'm being okay. But she was cute. But anyway, to a 13-year-old. Okay. Anyway, but you know, when this shutdown occurred with the public schools beginning last March, under these strict municipal and state rules and controls, stay at home, don't go out, distance. There was a cartoon, one of the political cartoons, that showed a parent in their driveway, and they were writing over the bumper sticker that you often see on people's cars. My son or daughter is an honor student, high school X. And so they crossed it out and said, I now know that my child knows nothing. See, they've had to homeschool the kid, and they find out, well, what have you learned in all these years in public school? Nothing. They can't read, they can't write, they don't know any history, they don't know how to add or subtract. So, but I think that what has happened, I was noticing that over the last couple of months or so, as this slowly but surely opening of public schools more broadly around the country has been occurring in places, that there's an interesting response by parents. Now, if you're talking about New York, if you're talking about Chicago, if you're talking about places in California, these public schools have virtually not opened up. Now, why is that? Oh, are we concerned about the safety of the children? Well, if you only know what you read in the newspapers about the coronavirus, it has become very clear that the ones least susceptible, either catching it or having any severe symptoms or dying from it, are children. And that, in fact, studies have shown that children going to the schools, but they do certain normal precautions, are not even likely to be that contagious in spreading it to older family members in the house. So, of course, everyone should, just in general, if there's a virus around, you show common sense. But in spite of this, one teachers union after another around the country said, oh no, it's not safe to go back. We have to get the inoculations first before anybody else. Or even if we do, how can we be sure that it'll be safe an environment? Our local school districts have to have larger and bigger financial commitments from the taxpayers through either the municipal or the state governments. And they basically refuse to go back to school. Now, all of these studies, and this is the case whether you're reading, quote, the conservative media or the modern American liberal or progressive media, by which I mean the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of them have now caught on to the realization how much kicking and screaming the lefties had to be dragged into this, that this year has been disastrous for kids. They have not been learning. It's difficult for younger kids to have the concentration and the attention span to be doing a Zoom class with the teachers, or having the ability for the teacher to look over their shoulder in like grammar school and correct Johnny or Sally's work. This isn't going on. And then as reasonably been pointed out too, there are segments of the American population who are in the lower income brackets, often in what we call minority group communities. And sometimes they don't have the ease or even the access to internets and computers. So these children have all fallen even further behind if some of the things I've read, and maybe the viewers and listeners have read, are suggesting to be true. So as a consequence of this, and in the face of it, again, the media, this includes the left of center publications, again, like the Washington Post and the New York Times, have been pointing out that more and more parents are asking, should I even bother with public schools? So either to try to become more effective through homeschooling, if the parent feels that their time and attention and ability to share that knowledge is possible, or to find private alternatives, private school alternatives where the schools have been open, or at least certainly a lot more open than these public schools have been, and where they have competent and qualified teachers so that Johnny and Sally can not just get their education, but catch up from having had a year of almost ignorance. And to be honest, ignorance is not bliss. So one can take the silver lining coming out of this, Jacob, in spite of everything else, is that it is making some parents, I'm not saying a majority of the nation as a whole, but a larger number of parents than, let's say, before the coronavirus and the government imposed lockdowns, to be more aware of the incompetency and the unreliability of the public schooling system, and that they need to take a greater responsibility and to out private sector alternatives, a competitive environment for education. And maybe something good will come out of this in spite of everything else in this arena, at least.
Yeah, good points. You know, ever since this debate got going, Richard, there's been this notion that homeschooling is better. You know, that people ought to be homeschooling their children, and that as long as you have this alternative to public schooling, everything's fine. Well, I just don't agree with that. You know, there are parents that are really not competent to educate their children, that and they can't afford to send their kids to a private school. Private schools are very expensive. And so by default, they end up sending their kids into a public school system. So you have this system, the status quo, that consists of homeschooling, private schools, which are licensed by the state, of course, and then public schooling. Well, that is not the ideal. The ideal is a total free market in education. Now, why does that make a difference? Well, suppose you've got a bunch of parents that don't feel competent or not interested in homeschooling that say, well, you know, we know this guy that's really good in physics, brilliant guy that works down at the local tech place. And he's taught before and he's a fantastic teacher. Why don't we just hire that guy to teach our students physics? And everybody in the homeschooling area or anybody not going into private schools can hire that guy collectively. Same thing with a math teacher or an English teacher. So you have these areas that would spontaneously arise. That can't happen legally in most states because this is not a licensed school. Now, there's nothing to prevent you from going and hiring tutors, but as soon as you collectivize it and say, well, we're going to advertise this for any students that want to sign up, well, that gets real close to a school. And they will shut you down. I mean, they will go into court and shut you down for being an unlicensed school. And so as a result of this, you end up with an educational system that I think is sort of stifling because people are denied this opportunity. Another example of this is, let's take workplace schools. I mean, there's a lot of places where brilliant people are working. I mean, you could take examples like Microsoft or Google or Amazon. And suppose they said, well, look, we're going to offer all of our employees educational facilities here. And we're going to draw on our employees here. And we're going to do, we're going to let the employees apply to teach a course, and we're going to review their credentials. All that would be illegal because they're operating an illegal school. And yet, kids would most likely get a much better education from these people, even though they're not licensed. You see, the whole system is based on licensed teachers, which have to get this special degree, an education degree, and then a licensed school, approved by the state. And so you lock out of people's ability to seek knowledge an entire group of people that are very competent at teaching, but have no interest in going and getting a teacher's certificate.
If I can elaborate on that, I have spent my life mostly in academia at different institutions of higher learning. So I know what kind of students major in what type of fields. And of course, faculty members talk among themselves. And it almost has become a caricature, a satire, with those grains of truth, that if there's a young man or woman who comes to college and they can't make it in one of the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, or its basis a lot in mathematics, or if they really can't even make it in a quote, one of the hard social sciences like economics, or a serious business field like accounting and finance, where you need to know some mathematical skills. What do those students do rather than drop out? Oh, they declare a major in education. And so they can get an education diploma in teaching little Sally and little Johnny how to read and write. And what's interesting about this, Jacob, is that the vast majority of the courses are not ones in which people are trained, well, you're going to become a high school history teacher. You're going to become a high school biology teacher, et cetera, et cetera. No, the vast majorities of these classes are an educational pedagogy. That is, how do you teach? Oh, this is the way you set up, little examples, templates of how to teach, but they're not taught content. So faculty members in these other fields often feel that these people are coming out with education degrees, a bachelor's degree, qualifying them to teach from kindergarten through high school in principle, and that they've been taught supposedly techniques of how to do things in the classroom, but without the serious content, and they don't have that serious content because they couldn't make it in those fields to begin with, and which is why they went into education. Now, I'm sure that someone listening or hearing me say this is going to vehemently object. And I therefore want to add a long annotated footnote, if I may, Jacob. There are many competent and qualified, dedicated, hardworking, sincere people, even in the public school system. I had public school teachers who inspired me, but institutionally, systemically, the system is constructed as a monopoly, as you were pointing out, both by who of the institutions that can provide it, that is government schools, which your children are in principle mandated to go to, that you cannot teach unless you have a government approved license in educational pedagogy rather than a subject matter per se. And that therefore innovation and motives and incentives to try to do better and devise increased skills and so on and so forth are diminished or in fact shoved into the corner. And in spite of all that, there are good and sincere teachers, but systemically the system is rigged to make it impossible for really good teachers to want to excel or to teach the way they think would be better. They're straitjacketed into these templates from the time that they were in college getting their education degree. It doesn't allow the innovation, the creativity. If I can just continue with this for a moment more, Jacob, on this thing. I got my degrees in economics, and that in a sense is a union card for me to be qualified to teach at the college or university level, which I have done. But I didn't have to go get a separate and distinct education degree, So let us suppose that a kid comes to me in the freshman year of college, and he takes an introductory economics class, I'm qualified to teach him. That is, the school has looked at my educational credentials and I've been qualified and they hire me because they consider me competent. But let's suppose that I wanted to either have a part-time job in addition to that, or even to volunteer to be teaching the same kid economics in his senior year last semester of high school. That is, it's the same kid who's 18 in his senior year of high school and 18 in his first semester of college, right? Okay. I can't teach economics like that in the senior of that same kid's high school because I haven't been licensed. I haven't been approved. I haven't had the special educational certification. What kind of nonsense is this? What kind of nonsense is this? So in other words, you lock out people who would be interested, qualified, and might have the skills and expertise and enthusiasm that other allowed high school teachers do not. And why aren't they there? Well, special interests use the state. Something that Adam Smith explained a long time ago. The power of the interests. Lock out the competition. Don't make me look bad. He might be willing to work extra hours with the students. My God, would be willing to compete and take the job for a little less pay than I would. No. Lock out the competition. It's the use of the state to support a special interest, not just financially, but now ideologically, because the teachers unions and the school boards then have this template of what the students are to be taught with a particular ideological and political content to them, which may be very different from how the parents think about things and what they think should be taught.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about that here you are teaching these students, but you're prohibited from teaching them over the high school level because you don't have a license.
Correct.
And I think, and it's fascinating. I think part of it is that they want those public school teachers to be molded in the structure that they want. When you come in from the outside, you might break free of that structure, which is a great threat to them. And over time, a teacher learns that he or she better fit within these parameters, or they'll start squeezing you out. I mean, that's why I think it's very rare that you'll find a high school teacher or a junior high teacher or elementary teaching libertarianism. This is just not going to be permitted. And that if it starts to happen, there's going to be bad things going on. I'll give you an example of this phenomenon, a personal example. We were doing an FFF seminar many years ago in Houston, and I was scheduled to speak at a local high school there, a public high school, the next day by the Libertarian Club, which was out of school hours. It was like after school was over, the Libertarian Club was having me speak. Well, the night before, we put on an FFF seminar, and there we spoke about drug legalization and the horrors of the drug war and why there should be no drug laws. Well, one of the parents that was there to monitor things, because they knew that I was going to be speaking the next day, they call the school board. The school board gets all upset and calls the principal and wants to know what's going on here, that, this pro-drug person is going to be speaking at the high school. I mean, things just went crazy. And so finally things settled down, and they said, well, you can go ahead and give the talk. And so I'm talking to the group there, and the parents that snitched on me were there, and so was their daughter. And I could tell the daughter was mortified. I mean, just so embarrassed that her parents had done this type of thing. But I give my talk, and I give it straight on what libertarianism stands for, why drugs should be legalized, why the drug war has been such a horror. And in the Q&A session, one of the students raises his hand and says, what is it that causes old people to be so scared of new ideas? And another one pipes up and says, well, it's because they're old. And so, but I mean, this is the classic example. Another example, I was giving a talk to an advanced high school here in Virginia. I mean, these are advanced students, again, to the Libertarian Club after school was over. I gave them the talk about the New Deal, questioning Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal policies, the socialism in America, interventionism. And in the Q&A, Richard, I mean, there was hands going up, there was cross discussions, arguments taking place. It's a teacher's dream. I mean, I had stirred up so much spontaneous discussion. People were upset, they were, arguing with each other, and all of a sudden this man who was in the front row stands up and starts screaming. And he was a teacher there, that this is outrageous, this is the most ridiculous nonsense I've ever seen. This man is teaching you nothing but nonsense. I'm leaving and I invite all of you to join me. So he starts to walk out and nobody follows him. But he goes back to his chair and everything was suppressed at that point. The whole dynamics were over. There was no questioning, discussions, animation, nothing. Everything was just sour. This is the environment in public schools.
Well, I had an episode story that I can tell. This was many years ago. I was in graduate school in New York, working on one of my advanced degrees. And there was a fellow named Jim Cowan, and he was the director of the Northern Bergen County Chamber of Commerce in northern New Jersey. And he was not just a libertarian, he was an anarcho-capitalist, right? He went even further than you, Jacob. He wanted to privatize the police and the courts. But obviously, he couldn't see that in his role as, the head of this local chamber of commerce. But what he would do is that he was offering evening seminars for high school teachers. And the idea of it, you could take this for a form of credit, and that would be like brownie points towards getting a salary promotion in your high school. So, of course, he invites all of these free market economists, many of them associated with as graduate students with the Austrian economics program at NYU at that time. And so I'm one of the speakers. And he asked me to give a two-part, that it was over two class sessions over 2 weeks, on labor markets and labor unions. So the first session goes, and I'm talking about the importance of free and competitive markets, and the harm that minimum wage laws do, the dangers and anti-competitive nature of labor union restrictions. So it's now the next week, right? Part 2 of this. And so who has now showed up? Not just these high school teachers who had signed up, just to take this for their little, credit for promotion. Some teacher union thugs showed up because they had heard about this. And they, what do you mean you're against the union? We serve our teachers and the students. You're just a reactionary person who doesn't care about the young and the uneducated. You want to leave people in. They were so hard on this, to shut this guy down, to challenge the existing educational system. The idea that teachers shouldn't be forced to join a teachers union and pay dues and all the other business. They were so extreme and loudmouth that finally it reached a point that the other teachers in the audience told them to shut up.
That's great. That's great. Well, I had the same sort of experience. We haven't talked about what this system does to children. I mean, it's not a neutral system. And I got invited to speak to a group of what were called slow learners by a teacher friend of mine. And she had actually been a teacher of mine in junior high. And she said, hey, come on up and see me. I want you to see this. This was many years after I became a libertarian. So I go up there and she's in charge of the slow learners class. That's what they called. So I start delving into libertarianism and I expose them the principles and so forth. Well, these kids were mesmerized. I mean, all of a sudden the hands started going up and they started asking me question after question. They were enthralled by this philosophy they had never heard before. And they were very deep thinkers. I mean, these were the slow learners that had this natural aptitude for libertarianism. And she said, the reason I brought you up here is I want you to see how they treat people that don't fit within this mold. I mean, there's kids that are bored. They struggle against this system naturally. It's just part of their being that I don't belong here. This is like a jail. They when they're in elementary school, they start meandering around. They look out the window and stuff. So they get diagnosed as the slow learner or attention deficit disorder. And that's where the Adderall comes in, and the Ritalin and so forth. The drugs they start putting these kids on. And the parent, unfortunately, defers to that authority and says, oh, well, I guess they must be right. And they go along with this instead of trusting their kid. Now, some kids will trust their kid and say, I'm going with my kid on this. I'm removing it from this, and I'm going to take him to a more natural, healthy environment. But I think what they do to kids, it's immeasurable, Richard. Some kids I've talked to that were in college were still hooked on Adderall.
No, I think you're right. I think that the only solution to this, which you were emphasizing towards the beginning of our session today, our talk today, is that we have to rethink the entire nature of it. And I understand why there are many parents and others who talk about charter schools and so on, school choice in these avenues. But at the end of the day, if the educational system, and therefore the learning of our children and grandchildren, is to really be regained, restored, improved, and made in greater degrees of excellence, at the end of the day, it requires abolishing the existing the existing public school system. They need to be privatized. They need to be sold off. The government has to be out of the education business completely and allow the market to operate. And just as we expect that the market makes newer and better flat screen TVs, that the market makes newer and better shirts that are wrinkle free, that make newer and better smartphones each and every year, and that we not only expect that, but a majority of the time, the new and improved version comes out, or the new something altogether, and what happens? The price of it goes down. So I would argue that that which we expect from a flat screen TV manufacturer or a smartphone producer or the textile mill that makes nicer and more comfortable and more wrinkle-free shirts, newer, better, and less expensive over time, if we would just free up the educational system, we would see the same thing at work. Better teaching methods, improved pedagogy, enthusiasm in the classroom, in which teachers would be rewarded not for staying home, but for being in the classroom and seeing how they could do better in arousing that enthusiasm that you referred to than even the teacher in the next classroom right next door.
No, it's great. And wait, as you suggested, you got a bad system. You got good people. I mean, my sister was a public school teacher, elementary ed. Her daughter was. I was the attorney for a school board when I practiced law. But when you got a bad system and well-intentioned people, good people, competent people, the bad system's going to win out every single time. And as you point out, the free market produces the best of everything. It would do it with education. So on that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to talking to you next week, Richard.
Until next time.